Good afternoon, everybody. I want to take the opportunity to welcome all members of this committee to the first session of the PAC in 2017. I want to also welcome the members from the Auditor General's Department, and of course all of you here, Permanent Secretary and your entire team from the Ministry of Education. I want to also take the opportunity to thank those listeners who are listening to us on radio and who are viewing us on Channel 11. On radio, it is 105.5. And there is also access on Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. So we welcome the public involvement and engagement and viewership and listenership. The purpose of the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee is to examine the concerns raised in the report of the Auditor General on the public accounts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial years 2014 and 15 related to the Ministry of Education. We did a number of ministries last year. Ministry of Education was not one of them. So we continue the work based on the 2014 and 2015 reports of the Auditor General, and we begin with you in 2017, the Ministry of Education. As a committee, we are desirous of hearing from you as a key stakeholder at the Ministry of Education, because we want to learn what are the challenges that you are facing, and we want to determine some of the possible solutions to these challenges. The role of this committee is to help the Ministry of Education to improve its delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. What I will do now is to introduce members of the committee who are present. There is one member who will join us shortly, but I want to have the members of the committee, I will ask them to introduce themselves, and I will start with Senator Lester Henry on the right there.
Morning, everyone. I'm Lester Henry, member of the committee.
Morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Roger Samuel, member.
Good afternoon. Ayana Webster Roy, member.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now ask the members of the Auditor General's Department if they will introduce themselves, and then we will ask the Acting Permanent Secretary and her team to also introduce themselves.
Good day all, Gary Peters, Assistant Auditor General.
Good afternoon, Brian Caesar, Auditor Executive 2.
Good afternoon all. I'm Angela Siniswi-Jebe, Acting Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, and I will ask my team to start on my extreme left to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Ashram Deiraj, Director of School Supervision.
Good afternoon, Lisa Henry David, Acting Director, Educational Planning.
Good afternoon, Brian Mungal, Acting Director of Financial Accounts.
Good afternoon, Sharon Ashman John, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Education.
Good afternoon all, Shobha Jaisir, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary.
Okay, thank you all very, very much, and I will now ask our independent senator, who is a member of this committee and a new member of the committee, to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, thank you. I'm Jennifer Rafool, I'm a member.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator. There is a second row behind the first row, and I wonder if you can identify yourself. Is that okay? Permanent Secretary, is that all right? Yes, yes.
Good day, everyone. I'm Anjani Samaru, Auditor 3.
Good afternoon, Kevin Williams, Director HR.
Good afternoon. Christine Sahajad, Acting AO5.
Thank you very much. And I also want to take the opportunity to invite, to welcome members of the public who might be in the gallery. And I want to especially thank the press for being present at this particular meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, where we examine the report of the Auditor General and the Ministry of Education, and in which we engage the public servants led by the Acting Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Education. Before I go on, I do want to take the opportunity to acknowledge what today is in international terms under the United Nations sponsorship. On the 25th day of each month, this Parliament will continue to bring awareness of the United Nations observance of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, which will be observed on November 25th each year. The theme for this occasion, for observance of this occasion, is Orange the World, and it encourages persons to engage in activities which highlight the issue on the 25th of each month for 2017. As a result, some of our members and staff of the Parliament have worn something orange to commemorate the occasion. I think you can see if you look around that they have done that. And I've tried to get an orange tie myself. And we encourage members of the public to join us as we keep awareness of the importance of working to end violence against women and girls. And last year on that occasion, I'll just take a second, in my constituency, we did observe it with great intensity, and we involved all the 16 schools in my constituency. And we had a significant participation by people in the community. So remember this day, remember how important it is, and let's do our part not just to observe it, but to make the enlightened practices that go with its observance possible and also a reality in Trinidad and Tobago where we live. So we begin now with the questions, and I will ask the Permanent Secretary first. I will ask a few questions, and then I will ask members around the table. I'll start with Senator Ayanna Webster Roy after I have completed. But before I ask you a question, Permanent Secretary, I would like you to please make us an introductory statement so that we can understand the perspective from which you are coming. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start with the vision of the Ministry of Education. Basically, we really want to be a high-performing, dynamic, vibrant organization that is responsive to the needs of our stakeholders, and which work collaboratively, effectively, and efficiently to educate and develop an intelligent, versatile, productive, and well-rounded child. So basically what we are into is educating and developing our students. At the time, we are looking at the period October 2013 to September 2014, and then the other period, October 14 to September 15. At that point in time, the Ministry of Education did have a strategic plan covering the period 2011 to 2015. This plan was approved by Cabinet in 2012, and a copy was submitted to the Auditor General's Department, as far as I'm aware. I joined the Ministry of Education in 2016. I've been there continuously from June. So I am depending very strongly on the information that I would have gathered for this session and the assistance of my officers. some of whom also only joined in 2016. At the time, the Ministry of Education dealt with from early childhood care to secondary schools. It's a different Ministry of Education at this point. So we are dealing with a Ministry of Education that had 7 educational districts. We were dealing with 125 government secondary schools, 444 government primary schools. We were dealing with staff amounting to thousands because we are dealing with teachers as well as civil servants, as well as contract employees, and also daily rated employees. Okay, so seeing that we're dealing at that period, the questions, I guess, will be focused on that, and we are here to answer your questions as best as we can, sir.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I'll start with a very general question, PS. As accounting officer, basically you or your predecessor or anyone who succeeds you are responsible for ensuring that the financial business of the state for which you are responsible, in this case the Ministry of Education, is properly conducted, and that public funds entrusted to your care, the PS's care, are properly safeguarded and are applied only to the purposes intended by the Parliament through the appropriations process. Now, this is a general question, and I'm asking you as we begin the discussion, how does a permanent secretary, and you're giving your perspective as the accounting officer, ensure accountability and transparency in performing your role and responsibility in 3 areas I want to identify for you? One is ensuring that the proper system of accounting as prescribed by the Treasury is established and maintained. So there is a system, there is a formula for doing things. How do you ensure that this is done according to the framework set out? Exercising supervision over the receipt of public revenue. And thirdly, making proper provision for the safekeeping of public money and for the expenditure of public money. So it's a general question, and you will have whatever time you need to answer it, and you are free to give whatever perspective you consider relevant.
Okay. We're looking at the systems of accounting, which would have been established by the Comptroller of Accounts. We have set up an accounting unit which would be established specifically to do that. We also have the internal audit unit, which is responsible for ensuring, or at least working with the permanent secretary, to ensure that we are conforming with all the instructions of the Comptroller of Accounts, and the internal audit will report to the permanent secretary on any instances of breach, any instances of weaknesses, and it would be the permanent secretary's role to put things in place, put systems in place to ensure that we treat with those weaknesses and eliminate as far as possible, as well as to treat with whatever breaches that may arise. We have had in our finance and accounts unit, we have a director of finance and accounts, and we have accounting executives, we have accountants, as well as the accounting assistants, whose their roles are very clear, and there are checks and balances within that system in the accounting unit. Likewise, in internal audit, they are also very clear about their role to ensure that the ministry, by extension, the permanent secretary, is running the ministry the way it's supposed to be run, with concerning our receipts and expenditure. the internal audit would give us a work plan of what areas they're auditing. That plan has to be approved before they proceed. If anything comes along during the course of the year that would prevent them from working with that plan, those variations are also brought to the PS's attention, and we work accordingly. But the system is in place that accounts is very aware of what, persons in accounts, very aware of what their roles are. There are checks and balances within the accounting unit, and we have internal audit, which will assist the permanent secretary to ensure that that system is working properly and to highlight any instances which would require an intervention from the permanent secretary, in which case we have to do it because, as you said, it's public funds, and I have a responsibility to ensure that the ministry operates within the law, expend the funds as required, as allocated, and that we are literally not breaking the law. I don't know if you want me to elaborate anymore.
Well, I'll ask you some follow-up questions, and those may allow you to indicate different things that you may not have introduced in this response. Now, one of the things you mentioned was the internal auditor. And what we have found in examining accounts of other ministries, because we've done about 6 of them over the last several months, and we've now done the report, so we kind of appreciate what are some of the issues. We have found that internal auditing in most ministries is extremely weak. It is something that the Auditor General has complained about, and it is something that the examination of the individual ministries tell us that is a fact. So for the financial year 2015, for instance, the internal audit review was not provided in any of the documents examined at the time of audit in November 2015. It was explained that the internal audit unit had been involved in the verification of arrears due to public servants, and that they could not complete their work program, and so on. What is the situation with internal audit in your ministry? For instance, do you have enough staff? Can it function as it's supposed to be? It's supposed to function. Can it do the work that is required of it, which is really to be an internal watchdog of income and expenditure and the management of public money in the ministry? And how can we help you to ensure that you have an effective and functioning and in a very deliberate way internal auditing unit?
Chair, we will accept that our internal auditing unit, which probably comprises around 22 persons, we have some vacancies, which means, of course, we are not up to full strength. But we do have competent officers who try their best to do the job of the internal audit unit. We are of the view that we may have some clerks who probably are getting tied up with more administrative functions, and what we would need is probably more technical officers with the appropriate competencies to be able to do the job for this ministry. We have made representations to our HR unit and on to the Public Service Commission to have our positions filled, unfortunately with a limited level of success thus far. We have a lot of actors in the unit. However, our Auditor 3 is really doing her best to try and get the work done, in which case we have to do about sampling. We have sub-accounting units, so we have to deal with those as well. And as I said, over the years, we may have had to deal with arrears for thousands of public officers and teachers, and it did hamper the work of the internal audit. That we got that sorted out a couple of years ago, so now we are down to what I would say the regular work of an internal audit, and yes, we don't have enough staff, but we are doing our best to do what we need to do.
So a strengthened staff would allow for a more effective internal auditing function, would you say that?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Now, besides the internal auditing overall, I mean, there are many units and subunits in any organization like a ministry.
Yes.
What can you do in the meantime, let's say over the next year, to ensure accountability and transparency in the small accounting units so that you don't end up with a big problem at some point? So that as you manage these in a decentralized fashion, you also take into account the overall efficiency and effectiveness and the management of money in the ministry. Can internal audit play a role in that in relation to the accounting officers who are in charge of these units?
I was just clarifying, yes, internal audit would audit the sub-accounting units. Now, our sub-accounting units are headed by
Senior officers.
pretty senior officers in the accounting stream. So what we expect is that the senior officers in charge of the sub-accounting units, and we have them in the schools, in the secondary schools, and we have 40 secondary schools, 40 primary schools, sorry about that. And
The district officer.
we have 85 secondary schools, and the head of those sub-accounting units, as I say, have their role to do, and the internal audit audits those the work of that sub-accounting unit.
Okay. So are all your sub-accounting units only in schools, or do you have departments within the ministry that also have these?
We have in the district offices, and we have in the LRC, which is rooted at Capital, the Learning Resource Center, as well as the examination unit, and now with scholarships and advanced training division. We have a small one at ECIAF, which is very small.
But do you take my point that if we manage these subunits effectively, I mean, you're not likely to end up with a big problem?
Yes, sir. We accept that.
And one final question before I move on to MP Ayanna Webster Roy. There were certain things flagged in the Auditor General's report, which you might say are issues he saw as pervasive issues. All right? These relate to your ministry, but there are also things that we might find in other ministries, but we're focusing on your ministry today. He flagged issues like inventory control, lease agreements, contractual agreements, contract employment, storage of payment vouchers, overpayments, outstanding commitments, cases of theft and losses reported, and some instances of void checks. Now, these things have happened, and I mean, it's one thing to flag them, but how can we ensure that these things do not continue, that they do not persist, that if mistakes happened or supervision was not as tight as it needed to be, that it can be corrected, that it can be rectified going forward?
I was writing down some of the issues you raised. We're talking about inventory, lease agreements, contract agreements.
Yeah.
We have put things in place with inventory, because we have a listing of the inventory, which we have to update as we go along. We are well aware of that. With respect to the lease agreements, however, the ministry does not have ultimate responsibility for the preparation of those lease agreements. The procedure is such that we would have to go through what is now the property management section of the Ministry of Public Administration and Communications there is a procedure of going to cabinet to get approval for the rental or lease of the property. And thereafter, the lease agreement is prepared, not by the ministry. So we, at any other ministry, we're caught up in that system, which we really have no control of the timing of the preparation of the lease agreement. But as far as possible, as soon as it's ready, we have it on hand so that if audit comes in, we can make it available. Contract arrangement agreements, if we are talking specifically employment contracts, those agreements are supposed to be prepared by...
CPO.
No, not the CPO, sorry. No, some years ago it would have been really, well, we were told, we were given a template of how to prepare an actual agreement. So once the terms are fixed by CPO, the ministry's legal unit can prepare it.
Okay.
Before that, those agreements had to be prepared by the Chief State Solicitor's Department. And that certainly was causing a delay because all the ministries' contract employment, those agreements had to be prepared by that section of the AG's office.
Yeah.
So since that is now in the hands of the ministry, it makes it a little easier. But when we are dealing with thousands of persons on contract, we could have a little delay in getting it, and it depends on the size of the legal unit in the ministry. Right now, we have 2 persons in the legal unit in the ministry, so that could contribute to the delays in the preparation of those contract employment, those agreements. Storage. Yes, we had an issue with storage, and we probably will continue to have an issue with storage because literally, as I said, we are dealing with thousands, over 22,000 persons. Trying to keep vouchers for that quantity will always be a question of space. We now have a vault, yes, but we have to accept that it might not be large enough to hold our records, so that we're looking for alternative sites. But it's an issue of volume and lack of space with that. But we are working on that right now. Overpayments. It has been an issue with Ministry of Education, and we accept that. We have put systems in place in our HR units to treat with minimizing and make sure we reduce it, to reduce those instances of overpayments. Because, as I said, we are dealing with schools across Trinidad, well, over 100 schools. We go through, yes, the district offices, but the information has to come from the school to the district office to the Ministry of Education. And we all know by the time that happens, we could be paying someone who may be on leave. We have put in place some new systems in HR. We have issued circulars to the effect of what the new system would be, because we are aware that overpayment is an issue. And we have utilized technology where we are now allowing certificates, applications for leave to be emailed to the ministry so we could start working on it while we wait for hard copies to come in. We have accepted that they can contact the ministry to give us information so that we could try to avoid overpayments from occurring. And of course, we treat with overpayments as we would if we have arrears of any funds that we have in arrears for the officers. If there is an overpayment, we will, in accordance with the circular, we will recover. So we accept that we had an issue, and it's still an issue, but we are working on it, and we have put systems in place to reduce it to as far a minimum as best we can. Thefts, loss, void checks. The issue with the void checks, right. The issue that was flagged in the report is that we were not stamping void on the checks. Rest assured, we are stamping void on the checks.
Okay.
So that issue should not be happening unless, as I say, simple, there may be an error, one or two cases, but certainly we have put that system in place.
Okay.
What did I have again? Well, theft and loss, as I say, that was usually, it could be picked up with audit. Most of it, sorry to say, might be in the schools, but we are working on that as well. We have continuous meetings with principals, reminding them of their role and responsibility within their plant. And we have also security on site at the schools. Right now we are using MTS. We have some other security firms so that our schools, we are trying our best to see how secure we can make our schools. It's a large bill to pay, but it is something we have to do because we can't afford for the theft and loss to continue to increase. So we, given the size of the ministry, we will still have some challenges in some of the areas, but we are trying our best to put things in place to minimize.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question though. I mean, wouldn't effective automation and software systems and, you know, good application of good application of computer use, wouldn't those things solve some of the problems here? I mean, all the record keeping issues, the HR issues, the overpayment issues. I mean, how far are you from managing an effectively automated system that would allow you to be more efficient and effective in this area? I mean, I would think that for the Ministry of Education, given the fact that you deal with all of these establishments with literally thousands of school children and different plants in different places, this would be an absolute necessity.
Chair, I smile because I know we are trying to get the ministry as far as possible to be automated. We have some schools really, some are in a better position than others to use technology to get information to us. But then we also have the challenge that in accordance to the legislation, there are just some things that we haven't reached that stage just yet. Let's put it that way. We still have to stick with the paper, and accounting has not, there are certain parts of it that is still very paper-based. So it's difficult to automate everything, but what can be automated and what the schools who have the technology and staff to utilize it properly have been doing it, as far as I'm aware. And I think that is why we were in a position to institute the submission of things via email, and well, there's always phone call and fax. But so that we are no longer dependent so heavily on feet and cars to deliver things, to collect things from the school, get to this district office, and then for the school supervisors to get it to the ministry. So as far as we can, we have automated, but there are still some issues some instances where we can't in accordance with the legislation.
Okay, I'll ask Senator Webster Roy to continue the question. Not Senator MP, sorry.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue of record keeping would affect a number of different areas, and one area is pensioner leave, because as an MP, I have a lot of people coming to me with that particular issue. So I know you would have had delays in your ministry. So what would have been some of the factors contributing to those delays?
There are two units will be dealing basically with pensioner leave records. We have to get the information from HR, and then it will be prepared by the pensioner leave or persons, audited, and then signed off to go down to Controller of Accounts. Ultimate payment is still not in our hands. It will be the Controller of Accounts. However, over the period we are speaking of, the ministry unfortunately had some issues with building, some OSH issues, and therefore the ministry, a major part of the ministry, was functioning 5 hours a day. In some cases, some might be 4, and we're talking about over 2 years. Even accounts as well. So HR would have been working shortened hours, and as I say, I understand it at least 2 years we're talking about, as well as accounts. So given our share numbers with certain days, we did have a backlog, and we are trying right now because we have moved and we're in better conditions, and we are now working a full day to try and pick up with those sets of backlog. But I accept we did have an issue with that.
The records that you have submitted to Comptroller, how many have been processed?
Would we have that? That would be a difficult thing for...
From the records from the Auditor General, you would have submitted, I think, 586 during that period.
The period 14-15?
Yeah, 586 would have been submitted.
Yeah. I will have to get that information because I can't say at this point in time how much of that 556 would have been processed to date.
Okay, so in terms of the communication with persons who are waiting, what would usually transpire? Would the ministry keep in contact and say, well, we're at this stage, you should expect something at X, Y, Z date? What is usually the process?
It usually comes in on that.
But usually, the individuals come in, and we give them a feedback, the status of their matter. If it's at Comptroller of Accounts, they will be informed, and really and truly, it will be out of our hands at that point. We can be responsible for getting that document prepared and sent down to Comptroller. And that is within our control. As I say, we had issues with it. But all we can tell the officer when they come in is what stage it's at, whether we are still working at it within the ministry, and we've been trying, as I say, to shorten that process. But once it leaves the ministry, the most we can tell an individual is that we have sent it down to Comptroller of Accounts and maybe even share with them what month and year. And at that point, it's really in the Comptroller's hand.
Is there any advocacy on behalf of the individuals, the ministry following up with Comptroller and trying to advocate to ensure? Because I know of persons who have gone home and waiting patiently to the point where they died. And I mean, it's not fair with giving your life to service and then at the end you can't get what is your due. But is there any active advocacy on behalf of the individuals by the ministry?
Now, the officers in HR would follow up, but I cannot say that we'll follow up in every single case. I wouldn't be able to say that. But we try to follow up, particularly the ones where persons we would have sent down the documents maybe years ago. Now, if we sent a document last month, I don't know that we would be following up. But if we know we sent something 2 and 3 years ago and the person hasn't been paid as yet, yes, we will follow up on those cases.
Another issue that comes up is errors in terms of the documents going forward and omissions. How trained are the people at the pension and leave unit? And is there a training plan to ensure that as officers change, they know how to do the job, they understand the desk, and they're able to send the documents in without the errors and omission, and thus delaying the process even more?
All right. What I can say is that we have some seasoned public officers in that unit. In fact, they were brought back on contract because they would have been very familiar with the circulars, the relevant circulars from the CPO's office, Comptroller, whoever. So that we have a fair amount of expertise now to treat with pension and leave. So it's flowing a little faster. And I cannot say that I have not seen in my time so many cases coming back with errors. However, that is the situation now. During the period in question, I would probably have to find out how many persons we had and the level of competency. But it really is a case of persons being familiar with old circulars, dealing with increments, salary conversion, that kind of thing. A new person coming in really needs to be properly trained because we're looking at something going back. So the seasoned officers, I think, do a better job at it. But if we get new officers in the unit, yes, we have to train them, and usually it's under the more senior persons in the unit would do the training because of their familiarity with the area.
Complement of staff in that unit now, taking into consideration the contracted staff you brought in?
I will admit, no, we are not up to the size we should be.
Is there any plan to recruit?
Well, our recruiting, as I say, because we're looking at seasoned people, it would really be trying to get in persons on contract who knew the system. Anytime we get the new persons, as I say, we will have the learning curve of getting them up to scratch. So if we get public officers, then yes, we will have to do the training internally. But if we have positions, and we do have a couple, the plan is to fill those positions with contract employees who would know the job and would be able to hit the ground running.
Any time frame as to when you may consider?
We have a note. Okay. As far as I recall, we have a note to go to Cabinet to create, well, to allow for us to employ persons on contract into pension and leave positions. Again, as you might be aware, it's not just a note straight to Cabinet. It has to go through our PMCD, which is a Public Management Consultant Division of the Ministry of Public Administration and Communication, and all the ministries have to go through that process. So it's difficult to give a timeline on when that note will be ready to go to Cabinet. Once we have the approval, it will be a case of advertising, shortlisting, interview, selection.
My final question. In terms of the advocacy, do you intend to have somebody assigned specifically to liaison with the Comptroller of Accounts and then giving feedback to those persons who would have served and now looking forward to the pension?
Usually, it works better when the individual go and make the case. However, and individuals do go once they hear that we have sent it on. We will have to put something in place to say that we'll have to assign someone. I'm not sure we are at the point where we can literally take someone off a schedule and assign them to deal with follow-up once it goes to Comptroller. But as I say, the cases that come across our desk where the person's waiting for years, we will do that on those individual cases. And maybe if we get additional staff, we could look to see if that could become a part of the HR function to follow up on these issues. But at this point in time, I'm sorry, we don't have the capacity to do it.
To consider that because too many people are out there crying. And I mean, I'm young, but on behalf of all of those who would have served, I would really like you to consider that, please.
Yes, and as I say, our role is to prepare the document to Comptroller, and we will try and follow up, but it's out of our hands.
Even though the individual would go, it's always good to have that extra voice advocating on their behalf as well.
We try our best.
Thank you. Thank you for all your answers so far. I really appreciate them. I have a question. You were saying that regarding automation and putting into place technology that would help to kind of streamline processes and payments, that one of the problems is legislation that doesn't currently support that. Can you say which pieces of legislation specifically would be needed to be amended so that we can help with that?
Okay. Maybe my Director of Finance and Accounts could go into it in a little more details, but there's some pay record cards and those kind of things just right now cannot go, well, to my information is it cannot be automated. But I'll ask Mr. Mongol if he could go into a little more details on that matter. Thank you.
Most of the records under the Finance and Accounts Department, for example, the pre-record cards, the vouchers, and things like that, all those things are under the financial regulation that have to be kept. And the original is what is supposed to be kept. Hence, those things have to remain original and stored. For example, a pre-record card is supposed to be kept up to 60 years. So 60 years of a pre-record card for 20,000 people is be very large amount, and it's growing every year. So to keep it as be a space is what is the problem. And the same thing goes for the vouchers, but in case of the vouchers, most likely it's around 7 years to keep some of those records. But again, it's a large institution which creates a lot of documents in a year, which again come back to the problem with space. So if it is that it is legislated that okay, you could automate in the sense of scanning and keeping it on a computerized system, because when the auditor come and ask for original, you're supposed to produce the original. Right? So those are the kind of hiccups you have with it. Good.
Do you know specifically the names of the pieces of legislation so we can look into those?
One of them I could tell you off the bat is the financial regulation. That would be the Exchequer and Audit Act, which had financial regulation and the financial instructions. That's what I could say off.
Any more questions, Senator?
I do have one more question. Regarding impact and efficiency of spending, how does the ministry approach partnering and contracts with private sector entities, NGOs, charities, to help with service delivery?
Because we have many stakeholders, there would be NGOs and private enterprise who might be interested in contributing in some form or fashion. And usually they would approach a school. Sometimes you get the request to the ministry, but a school in a particular area, you might find the businesses in that area might be willing to give some level of support. So they approach the school, but the process is it would still come to the ministry to get sign-off on whether we would engage in that kind of partnership where some funding is concerned. Mr. Deiraj, who is our Director of School Supervision, could probably go into a little more of, over the years, what kind of partnerships we may have gotten into and which might still be ongoing at this point in time. Mr. Deiraj?
Thank you, PS. Good morning, Senator. What happens really is that a lot of schools are approached by corporate entities to run particular programs within the school environment. We are right now in the height of rolling out school-based management at schools. And part of that is, of course, engaging stakeholders in the community and outside the community. So if you look at RBC, for example, with their young leaders, they've engaged schools over a long period of time. We have spelling bee competitions, some other entities. We have homework centers that schools engage with private enterprise. So that this stakeholder engagement is a key component of the relationship between the school and private entities. But it is not a national, that you would have a company coming in and going to all the schools for one reason or the other. To a large extent, we have a lot of localized assistance being offered to schools. We do have like Integrity Commission from the other ministries that will engage the schools so that on a private enterprise basis, we have engagement. If you look at the East-West, not the East-West corridor, the North Coast, for example, and BP and their engagement with the schools in the North Coast, they have invested a lot of money in trying to bring those schools up to scratch in terms of participation and in terms of equity and so on. So we do have a lot of engagement from private enterprise, but it is not for, it is more localized rather than national.
Samuel?
Good afternoon again. I want to piggyback on what the chair first raised with regards to internal audit, as well as asking a question, and I will ask that first. With regards to the structure, recommended structure of the ministry, how many legal officers are you entitled to? Because you said you have 2 in such a large ministry.
Right now, we have 2 legal officers, 2s, a legal officer 1 and 2 APs in the unit. When I came in 2016, there was a senior legal officer. We have a position right now of director that we could fill, but right now it's a joint ministries, 2 ministries join up, so that we have to review that structure. At the time, the structure probably was just a senior legal, two legal officers, 2, they had a legal researcher, and the APs can come or go as sorry to say APs are associate professionals who are returning scholars. We can assign them to the legal unit once they have that training. As I say, right now, because we're looking at a merged, 2 ministries merged, we have to review the unit. And certainly we need a director, and we probably need more than 1 senior legal officer. But as it is now, as I say, we have, well, 2 legal officer 2s and a legal officer 1.
And the reason I ask that, I'm quite concerned with the long-term impact of our present and past deficiencies. And the longer we take to get it right, the worse it becomes. With that in mind, I know we are looking at the 2014-2015 report. But is your present operations any different from then? Has it significantly improved? Is it better than it was from a standpoint of the succession planning of the ministry? If it's expected to get worse, meaning that if people are not being replaced or hired in the time frame they should be, what you encounter is that people are retiring, people's contracts are expiring, and you could find yourself in probably a worse situation that you were in 2014, in 2017. How do you plan? First of all, is it worse? Is it going to get worse? Do you have an idea of the amount of people that are close to retirement will be off the list in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? Do you understand the amount of people whose contracts are going to expire within the next year or 5 years? And what is being done to ensure that there isn't a void and we find ourselves worse off? Do we have that kind of mechanism in place to ensure that we're here? Do we write the CPU and all the entities in the Ministry of Public Administration 5 years in advance and say, look, in 5 years from now, we have 25 persons of a certain level are going to approach retirement. They're going to be retiring. Could we set and train a mechanism to ensure that when these people, before these people move on, there is a set of people that can tap into their expertise? And then as they move on, the people who are coming in would have rubbed shoulders with them before they leave. Are we planning those kinds of things? Are we looking into those things in advance? Or are we kind of hitting and hoping that these people don't die on the job or don't retire too soon? Or if they retire, we could probably ask them to stay on a little longer and stuff like that. But what are the preparations to ensure that it doesn't get worse? And that's my question.
It's basically an HR issue, which, as I say, maybe I can ask my director, DPS, in charge of HR, to get into. However, before we go there, when we're dealing with the public officers, we know when they will be retiring. I mean, we can't avoid a certain age. However, when we make requests for positions to be filled, because we have to depend on the service commissions, the most we can do in the meantime is put someone, the most senior person, to act. Again, we have no control when Public Service Commission will fill the position permanently. With respect to the contract employment, yes, we know, because that is a definite period, we would know when a contract is coming to an end. And we would be able to go. We have been going more than 6 months in advance when contracts are coming to an end to get approval to hire persons again on contract. As I say, that has to go to PMCD, and again, they probably have staffing issues as well, and just we don't get it back in time. So we ended up having to put certain arrangements in place, which we know are not the best arrangements in the world. We also have an issue of funding, because we, as much as we may like to hire as persons on contract, particularly this year, our funding has been reduced substantially. So even that avenue, which, as I say, over the last few years might have been the way you could go if you can't get the positions filled from the Public Service Commission, that we have a little issue with that right now. But that was helping over the last few years. So yes, we can say we know when persons are going to retire. If you're looking at natural compulsory retirement, we have that listing. We know what positions they're in, and therefore we can ask for the positions to be filled. We certainly are proactive in asking for it to be filled with an actor, because that is it's a shorter process. We could go with the most senior person on the establishment, but sometimes and that can work for positions that are unique to the Ministry of Education. However, if you're looking at a clerk or a research officer, which is across the board, while we can put interim arrangements in place to put the most senior person to act, most senior person in the ministry to act, that position is not going to necessarily be filled by that individual. So there are some challenges where that is concerned. We are trying to work it as best as we can, but we now have the additional issue of funding restricting us a little bit with going the way of contract employment, which has been helping over the last few years. So,
I would probably ask my cadre of questions. I recognize that in the report, there was no evidence of site visits being made by officials of the ministry to any of the project samples, or that the projects were monitored to ensure successful completion or adherence to agreed terms and regulations. What is the reason for this? How does the ministry plan to ensure that there is value for money, for funds expended on these types of projects? That's the first question I want to ask. The second question is, I recognize that on an annual basis, there is a great deal of expenditure to replace furniture at schools. What is the cause of this? Is it getting worse based upon indiscipline of students? The major cause of destruction, because I myself visit schools, and there are times in the backyard of schools, there's a pile of furniture that's been destroyed by students, violence, whatever situation. How are we dealing with that? Because it's an expenditure on an annual basis. How are we dealing with that type of expenditure? Or how do we curb on it from a discipline standpoint in the schools? That's the second question. And my third question is based on the transportation system, meaning the contractual arrangement between, I think, is it PTSC and the maxi taxis people. I have, fortunately for me, I live in an area and I visit areas on the North Coast and stuff like that. And I remember there were times when I myself, stood and wondered, how they still have that maxi taxi on the road? Because of the condition of the vehicle that they turn up to travel in. As a matter of fact, I ventured on one just to peep inside it to see what the condition is. And from inside, you can see the road, not through the windows, but I mean through the floor and stuff like that. And some students pointed it out to me. And I remember communicating with certain officials. I don't know if anything was done, but that is the situation I saw. I want to know what is put in place to ensure by the ministry that these things do not reoccur, and that the conditions of the transportation contracted by the ministry through the relevant authorities is really up to the standard that you want.
Okay. Can I go with the furniture
Yeah.
first? I think we have to admit that we don't get furniture made the way it used to be made.
But we do get children made in could have violated.
We don't get furniture made the way they used to be made in my time in school. But because they are bonded contractors, we have very little wiggle room to choose probably another firm who may do a better job at producing the furniture. So we are limited with what is in the contract book, as we put it, where we have to go to X contractor, and the quality may not be at the standard we would like. I wouldn't like to say that the children have, yes, the children have changed over the years, Mr. Samuel, but I don't know they have changed to the point that they are mashing up furniture willy-nilly. Things happen in schools, and furniture over time will depreciate, and we will have a little graveyard of furniture in the back of the school. But we go through the Board of Survey, and we would go through what is unserviceable pieces of furniture, and we go through the process through Central Tenders Board to deal with those disposal. But I think it comes back to the quality of the furniture that we might be getting now. They don't seem to last as long as the ones when I was in school. We will not go into how long ago that was.
If I may ask a question on what you said, isn't there a possibility that if for some reason, I'm just asking, through some violent means, indisciplined action, children destroy furniture, shouldn't there be a clause in the education system that would cause the parents to pay for the furniture? I'm just asking. Same way if I drive on the road and I had an accident and destroyed a TNTech light pole or something, there's some kind of charge for that.
My understanding is maybe at the school level, if you have an altercation and there's some damage to a piece of furniture, and it is absolutely clear who was responsible for such damage, you could do it at the level, probably deal with the parent or the guardian to impress on them that there might be a little obligation to replace said furniture. But to say, but then it comes down to if they can afford it, because not everybody can afford it. So it's going to go through a case of being absolutely 100% sure that you can say student X or Y was responsible for destroying a piece of furniture, and therefore that student, and by extension parent and guardian, will be responsible for replacement. That could be a little difficult. But as I say, I'm sure the ministry will not object if a parent chooses to replace a piece of furniture that might have been damaged in an altercation. But as I come back to the original question of the furniture, we may have no control of who we get the furniture from. All right? With respect to the site visits or the projects, the ministry has two divisions who would normally get involved with our construction projects, even our repair program. We have Educational Facilities, EFP, Planning and Procurement Division, and we have the Educational Planning Division. And there was a time when we had teams made up of persons from each division who would go out to our projects to do our monitoring of the projects. Over time, we have gotten into many projects. And with EFCL, who is our project managers, it's really, they have a responsibility to do that monitoring. We would do it on our educations we have, because as I say, we're looking at value for money. All right. Over time, we may not have been able to keep up with the team visiting each site. We also have an issue with staff constraints in both of those divisions. So yes, in the period 14-15, and pre-13-14, yes, we would have had those teams in place doing the visits. Over time, we may not have been able to keep up with each project being visited. We have agreed that we are going back to that arrangement where we will go out, even though EFCL is the project manager, who's supposed to have consultants, paid consultants to manage these jobs, paying clerks of work to manage the job. Because it's government funds, we feel we have a responsibility, so we have reinstituted those site visits. We have an engineer on board now who would accompany as best as possible to ensure value for money, to ensure that what we are being invoiced is properly invoiced, and to ensure that it works up to standard. So we are putting that system back in place. We will accept that maybe over the last year we were not able to do it as best as we would like, but we will be putting it in place. And have meetings now, more regular meetings with the EFCL. We get monthly reports. We will have more monthly meetings to go through those reports, as I say, with our persons from the ministry going on the visits and bringing reports to us. And transport. Now, the arrangement with PTSC, Mr. Deraj could give us more information on it. However, our arrangement is with PTSC, and PTSC hires the maxi taxis. PTSC has a responsibility to ensure that the maxi taxis don't have see-through floors or whatever else they may have. So that really, our arrangement is with PTSC. The PTSC has the arrangement with the maxis, but I hear your point, and Mr. Diraj would go into a little more of what our roles are, Ministry of Education and PTSC in relation to the maxi taxis.
Thank you, PS. With regard to PTSC, we do operate with an agreement with PTSC, but PTSC has its own rigor of choosing maxi taxis, the quality of the maxi taxis, and the drivers. There's a complete regimen of processes that the PTSC go through. In fact, one of their documents that I have before me under section 22.3.1 speaks to the monitoring of the maxi taxis and the conditions thereof, and every annual check that vehicle must go through. If there are cases where some of these maxis are operating, as you said, that the roadworthiness of these vehicles are subject to question, then those reports should be sent to the Ministry of Education, and we can pick it up with PTSC and ask them to account. There's the second dimension of the private transport, as you notice, they fall under, they are now painted in a particular color and licensed with a particular way. They fall directly under the licensing system with the licensing authority, but also through PTSC, there is a relationship with them. But they are licensed to transport children on a private basis and falls under licensing authority. We are concerned only with the PTSC concessionaires, and when we look at their documentation in terms of the depth and rigor of their processes, the ministry is comfortable with that relationship at the moment. However, if there are cases where the roadworthiness of the vehicles are in question, we should be informed so that we can act on it immediately.
Would you proceed, Senator Henry? And I'll ask you to follow after. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I want to start off with some basics, and get to slightly more interesting things after. But what is the size of the Ministry of Education in terms of full-time employees? Just to gauge the kind of management issue we're dealing with. Yeah.
At this point in time, or at the time 14-15 and 13-14?
Well, both if you have.
Well, I could give you around 15. We were dealing with 2,788 civil servants, 15,584 teaching staff. We had 1,735 contract employees and 35 daily rated employees, 25, sorry, daily rated employees. The figures are higher. In relation to the civil servants right now, we are into 4,000 plus. Teaching staff is about 14,415, and our contract staff right now is a little lower. It's about 1,136.
Okay. Could you repeat the figure for the daily pay?
25 and around 2015, we are now at 35.
35?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just give me a quick idea? What do daily paid people do? These are like cleaners or stuff?
No, we have laborers and drivers, and we have a few at ECIAF really running the farming activities. So they would cut grass and feed the animals, etc.
Okay. You mentioned a while ago about the security bill for school maintenance and protection. Do you have any figures on that? I mean, and what is the cost? Well,
yes, Mr. We have that information. The allocation. If you just give us 1 second, please.
All right. This one was 172 million. This was in 2015.
In 2015, our allocation and expenditure would have been 172. All right, this is the allocation was, 185.7
185 million.
$185,725,000. The actual expenditure for that year was $172,459,553.45 to be exact.
Okay.
We should be able to tell you a figure for 14 in a minute, sir.
While you're looking at this, and this primarily goes towards the MTS company, or is it a variety of companies?
Variety.
We have a variety of security firms providing security services for us. Just that MTS is the largest.
Okay,
I have the figure for 14.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Allocated $165,810,000, and we spent $113,420.48.
And this roughly covers about 200 schools, so primary and...
Security would be for the schools as well as the properties of the Ministry of Education.
Okay.
Security would be for the 85 government secondary schools and for all 444 government primary schools, as well as some early childhood centers.
Okay.
And as well as the ministry at its various locations.
At the time.
Is there any process by where the ministry might be trying to reduce this cost? I mean, this is a very, very high, a big number.
Because of the easy systems.
It's difficult to say that we want to reduce it when we have instances of theft and loss. We have a lot of early childhood care centers that we need to make sure our children are secured. We have all those schools that we have responsibility for, and as Mr. Samuel said, we have a different environment, children and the community to deal with now. So it's difficult to say that we would be able to find a way to reduce this bill, especially when this cost was based on 2008 rate.
Oh, okay.
So we are going out shortly, well, that's shortly to tender, and we expect that it would be higher.
Okay. But do you, does the ministry have any links with the police service? I mean, because where does the police come in protecting our schools and so on? Is just they play no role, or?
Community police, yes, we have a close relationship with the community police in areas. You would have heard recently where we are really and truly involved with them. Mr. Deiraj, as school supervision, can go into more details of that with our relationship with the police service, in particular community police.
Thank you, PS. With regard to community police, we have been given the names of community police, who is the person who is in charge of community police in every district. So there's a close relationship with all the schools and the community police. They play an active role not only in visiting the schools, but for any incident, but they also visit the schools to talk about discipline and what is required and that kind of thing to students. So besides that, we also have the Police Youth Club that is active in most of our schools. We have a direct link with the head of all these divisions, and they meet on occasion with the Ministry of Education. So the community policing is working for the schools, but at the school level, given the present climate, the number of theft and loss by district, it is difficult to reduce, and especially in particular communities, to reduce the amount of officers we have on duty protecting the schools.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with an article I saw in the Newsday a couple of weeks ago about issues with schools getting funding for on time. I think it was somebody from the union had wrote the article. Could anyone clarify what that was about? I mean, about funding being disbursed late.
Was it related to primary schools or secondary schools?
Secondary schools.
Well, funding usually comes when we make a request from the Budget Division, Ministry of Finance. Now, usually we give funding to the secondary schools for each term, so it's 3 times for the school term, for the school year. We make the request from the Ministry of Finance of Budget Division for the release of funds to how much we anticipate we will pay for each term. Well, in this year, we had gotten funding in late November month. And by the time we prepared and submitted, some schools had collected it in early December, and some had collected it in late December. But funding for the schools has been given, and it has been collected since December month.
Okay. So there was no, in terms of, because I'm leading up to the auditing, there was no issue with, it was just a delay on the part of the ministry, or was it something else that was going on in terms of the auditing and accountability issues?
Auditing?
No, I mean, well, accountability and audit, meaning that with the schools, was there some issue with schools not submitting reports, or?
There are issues during the year, the financial year. The schools were supposed to report back to the ministry every month on a return on how much they spent. That is something we always have a problem with from the school, because when we have to submit that information, remember when we have to give back budget every month as return statement on what we spent from what we had got. When we don't get back the information goes back to the ministry showing that under the school, money hasn't spent. For example, we might get about $35 million for the first term, right? When you send them back a return showing $20 million still unspent, because the school is not sending back the return on what they had spent so far, it hampers the next release. And we keep trying to get them to do that. We write them, we talk to them, many things we try with them, and yet it still falls back with the same problem.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh. I will go on now to MP Ayanna Webster Roy, and I had intended to stop at 1:30, but what I will do, I will allow for one question from each member as we close, and I'd like the Auditor General's office to just make some comments on what they have heard today, if they would like to make any inputs. Okay? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to that PTSD issue because it left me very troubled, right? So Senator raised the issue of safety, and you'd have alluded to the fact that there's a contract with PTSD and they would then subcontract. But what is the ministry doing to ensure that the contract you awarded to PTSD is being executed in a manner that would ensure the safety of your clients, the students? If I looked at the Auditor General's report and they noted that over 47 million was spent in that period, but they couldn't find the register of contracts. So that would have contributed to some problems in terms of their reporting. And I want to know, PS, what are you doing to address that particular situation? And two, what you intend to do in terms of monitoring and evaluation to ensure that the contract you gave to PTSD is being executed in such a manner that your students are safe when you're traveling on the road, please.
With regards to the contract between the Ministry of Education and the PTSC, we are presently working on we have the draft of the contract to be signed with PTSC. So that it has been completed at the ministry end. We have to send it to the PTSC attorneys for their comment. And hopefully we'll try to get that signed in the shorter rather than a longer period. And in it, we have set out specific obligations of the PTSC and the expectations of the Ministry of Education. So once that contract is signed, we should be on a better footing in terms of enforcement. In terms of monitoring and evaluation of the service, as it is right now, we depend on PTSC getting their drivers and their vehicles in the roadworthy condition and the vetting of their drivers with their regimen of process that they choose the drivers. We depend on PTSC. In terms of monitoring, we pay by the number of trips that a PTSC concessionaire will do per day. We have instituted a system to verify that the number of trips have been made because that we depend on that information to present for when to verify for their payment. So that, yes?
The system is that where you see the men and women on the road checking as they pass?
We pay by trips, so we don't pay by the number of students actually accessing. We have the safety officers at schools who would help us with verifying that the number of trips have been made. We have had some discussions with PTSC. They also have field officers that will help us verify the number of trips that have been made.
No, we don't have that. Senator Samuel, we follow up.
Just one question on the issue of fraud.
You didn't get a proper answer. I don't think Ms. Webster Roy is satisfied with the answer. Can you give something a little more elaborate that would help to
I'm
satisfy
still troubled
her?
because...
Perhaps not elaborate, but pointed.
Yeah, please.
Just specifically to the monitoring from the ministry, from the Ministry of Education, we are dependent on the checking at the school so that the number of trips that is done by PTSC, that is what we pay for. We have the safety officers who will verify, but we don't have a particular person outside that will verify that these are the number of trips that the maxi pass this particular way.
Might I add? We would depend, I think, more on the principals who are seeing these maxis and probably, as I said, the safety officers who are at the schools who can check the maxis, because, as I say, you can probably look at a maxi outside and see if a maxi looking road-worthy, but a little more than that would be required. But as Mr. Derad said, we don't have anyone at head office in the ministry. We expect that the schools with the transport coming to the school on a daily basis would be able to raise red flags with us if there are issues with a particular maxi or maxis. right? But we really don't have the capacity at the ministry level to go and do that. And anyhow you take it, it is expected that if we have a PTSC contracted the maxis, as I say, they would have gone through a procedure of making sure that the maxis are safe for our children and roadworthy. So we really rely on PTSC to do their part, and as Mr. Derat said, while it might not have been written in black and white before, it will be exactly what PTSC's role would be in regard to those maxis and what the ministry's role would be in relation to that.
Okay, MP Webster Roy wants to know this. Try and answer her question. You are checking, the maxis are being checked up and down.
Mm-hmm.
But who is checking on whether the children get to school to get an education? And how do you verify that the trips, in fact, have to do with the number of children who have to get to school? She wants an answer to that question, which I think is a legitimate and real question. So,
How do we end up with a maxi taxi at the school is the first thing to consider. A principal makes a request that X amount of children are coming from this particular area. So we have an idea that there are 15 children coming from this particular location to get to the school. So there's a need. Once we have that need, we will engage PTSC to organize a maxi to travel that particular route and get into school. We can tell you at the end of the week how many children have actually accessed the transport, because we have a form, and right now we have a monthly report that comes from the school that tells us how many children use that maxi and how many trips have been made. We have a specific form that the principals fill out at the end of the month and send that information. So we know if there are 15 children in X location, the school is in Y location, they have accessed the transport for the month. That is the system we have, but we don't have a dedicated person that will actually go on the maxi to ensure how many children are on it at any point in time, because we pay by trips. No, we don't pay by trips.
Senator Henry and then to Senator Russell. And then I will ask the auditors, the assistant auditor and his colleague to make a comment, and then I will close up, and that's it.
Okay, I know I might be diving kind of deep here, but I was told that some recent changes that requires principals to get 3 quotes for spending under $5,000, and that this is becoming a bit of a burden in terms of running schools on a daily basis. Could you verify if that's true and why, what's going on with that?
The system of 3 quotes is not a new system.
But with the value under 5,000, that's the part I was told is new.
That is not new either. Because if I have to buy something in the ministry, if it costs me $100, well, I mean, that might be a little ridiculous, but $500, for example, I'm going to get tea plates, and the tea plate is costing $30 a plate. I have to get quotes to see if I want to go with the $30, $35, or the $40. And the bill might only be $3,000 in the end. The 3 quotes is not a new system. I guess over time and in the past, there might have been a little facility that the ministry was allowing principals, because I guess of location, they're spread out all over Trinidad, that they gave them that facility. But what we are doing is putting back the original system in place, where the 3-quote system is in place, and they are required to conform with that system.
Okay, for any limit of any expenditure, not the,
Yes, you cannot.
yes, and there's no limit, right?
The 3-quote system prior to this year, the previous years, there was a 5,000, under 5,000 you're allowed to buy without 3-quote. However, over the years we have observed what has been happening, this system has been started to be abused. Literally, principals were starting to keep it under $5,000, right? And buying things for like $4,900. But they're buying it from one supplier. And when you get the invoice, the total invoice is stated about $40-something thousand. No quotation, none whatsoever. It's been literally abused directly by the principal. I'm taking, in our project to be done, we will keep it under the $5,000 and give it to this person who they want to give, right? Come back to the three-code system to cut off this abuse. Not only that, when a person was, they go to one supplier and they get one thing, you notice any price was about 4 times what you would have gotten by somebody else with this one code, with no code actually, not even one code, right? So we try now and bring back what it was. 3 codes for years, everything. Some principal argue the point that if you had to buy one light bulb, no school will have one light bulb. You're supposed to buy bulbs by the box and stock. Because those large schools you'll be supplying for out there, providing for your school, you have thousands of bulbs. That argument cannot stand, right? It's just a matter of bringing back what we want. We want value for money, quality for money. And we just, it's over $80-something million we give to those 85 secondary schools for a year, in one financial year. And it's really been a lot of abuse going on.
Okay, I think you eventually you did answer the question.
Okay, Senator Fool, you have any questions?
I don't have any more questions. I just wanted to express my thanks to the committee for everyone who responded so well to all the questions and gave so much information. Thanks.
Do you have any comments? I mean, all of this was based on your report. The questions have been generated out of that. You have heard the responses of the Ministry of Education within this time frame. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, we recognize that there are some pervasive issues outside the control of the ministry, and these will continue for some time. But we are encouraged by the positive action that the PS has taken, well, in matters where she could control some of these issues. Yeah. And hopefully this can be translated into shorter management letters next time around.
Okay, let's say the question of property management and these issues of contracts not being available when the Auditor General's basically intervention is required to write his report. Mm-hmm. If you listen to the response there, and it's something that's replicated in other ministries, the property management initiates it. The ministry has to wait, and until they get that final contract, they really cannot provide anything. Would the Auditor General be satisfied with the property management writing to the ministry, indicating that negotiations have begun with such and such a proprietor for such and such a building, and these are likely to conclude by such and such a time, and within the period arrangements have been made for the ministry to occupy the building? Would such a document suffice to the Auditor General until the contract is effected?
Well, the thing is, we really do a compliance audit, compliance with the regulations. Mm-hmm. What we could probably look at is issue a mitigating statement when we made the comment, okay, these things were not produced. However, yes. We saw action being taken in that regard.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is that I think it's important, if we're going to address the Auditor General's report properly and insist on compliance from the ministry or the entities, that we separate legitimate issues that have to be attended and things that are just part of the bureaucratic system that does not facilitate timely information and processes that cannot be concluded in a certain way, you know, so that you separate sense from nonsense, kind of them. You separate the issues that need to be flagged and need to be pursued and compliance insisted upon, and you separate those from those things that are really part of a bureaucratic system that causes inconvenience or untimeliness of delivery and things like that. That's why I asked the question, to find out if we could do this. Now, I want to thank the members of the Ministry of Education, Acting Permanent Secretary and her staff for answering the questions and for being forthright, I think, with their answers, straightforward. And I want to say that the Ministry of Education is a very big enterprise. I mean, you're talking about, based on your own answering, you're talking about 20,000 people employed in it. You're talking about a nearly $8 billion budget, 7-point-something billion dollars. You're talking about 300,000 children being managed at any one time between primary, secondary, and pre-primary levels of education. They are far-flung all over the place. They have to do with human capital building. They have to do with intellectual capital. They have to do with the capacity of the country to use human resource capability to fuel itself in production, productivity, competitiveness, innovation, sustainable development. This is no mean task. Ministries of education are very, very important thing. Schools are critical to the development process, and you now have the added responsibility of not just the school system, but the entire tertiary sector within the Ministry of Education. My concern would be how many of the recommendations made by the Auditor General are in fact going to be in place to make sure that there is no repetition when we come to the 2016 audit, or if they have not all been in place, how do we make sure that all of these things are rectified by the time the 2017 audit comes into play? And secondly, based on the things that are not recommendations but observations that you could improve to make the system more effective and efficient, how are you going to harness the manpower that is required, the organizational capability, the management systems, to make sure that you have a tighter operation here? Because this is, I mean, all the execution is done by the schools. And really what you do is policy, and you also do the management of the entire school system, although in a fundamental way, each school has to manage itself one by one. And this is a very difficult thing in my view, but you have a lot of resources, you have a lot of money, and it's important to do it well. Because in my view, the entire development paradigm depends on how well you handle education. It is not the only thing in the world, but you can't do it without it. And so I don't know if you would like to make a response to that. How well can you respond? How well can you effect the recommendations of the Auditor General? And looking at the other observations, do you think within a year or two we can deal with all of these issues so that we don't come back here in 2018 and it's the same old thing over and over again? Because there are things in the Auditor General's report in 2014 and 15, and I'm sure they're going to be in 2016 again, that have been there for the last 15 years.
Chair, there are some things that I noted in the 13, 14, 14, 15, which we have put in place. For example, we have the inventory up to scratch, we have the contracts register, we have that in place. We have taken on board the instances like the void and we also have, one of the things that came up in both reports will be publishing the checks. We put in things in place to avoid those things coming up in our other report. We accept that we have a mammoth ministry, and likewise a huge responsibility. With the merger of the ministries, we have an increased staff because we have 2 PSs, we have 3 deputy PSs. We are looking at the organization to see how we can manage our billions of dollars better. I cannot say that we will not have anything in our management letter next rounds. We have issues, as I say, with HR. We will still have some overpayments. I cannot say that it will be down to nil, but we are working. We have staff now, a little more staff now with the merge. but then we have merged more responsibility. But we are looking at it, and we're looking at the ministry as a whole to see how we can look at the structure of the ministry, to see how best we can manage this huge responsibility we have. And we have taken on board, as I said, some of the recommendations, and we have put things in place. Some are not in our control, but the ones that are in our control, hopefully we'll not see it again. Like, as I say, those registers which we have implemented. We have to beef up some of our divisions we're looking, as I say, on the structure, but we might have a particular view how our organization should be structured, but it has to go to PMCD, who will decide whether that is the structure for us. We have the 6-year plan that was done. Now, it might have been done prior to the merge, so that we have to review as well. We're reviewing our strategic plan so we know exactly where the ministry wants to go and what will be required to get it there. We are in the process of going through that plan right now because the last strategic plan was up to 2015. And many things changed around that same time. So we're in the process of doing that kind of planning foresight and see how best we can get our ministry to a point where we can reduce some of those instances and eliminate others.
It's very important that you do that well because you are basically managing the work life and productivity and the development of approximately 20% of the population. You know, and if you get that wrong, it's a problem. Okay? I just want to close on that note.
Yes. Noted, sir.
Okay. Huh? No, I did thank them before. I thanked them for being very forthright in their answers and making a contribution here. And I just want to close, because most of our questions were focused on financial matters and auditing and efficiency and so on. But I didn't want to close on that because I wanted to get the bigger picture. All of this thing that we are trying to address is really because of the bigger picture. And basically you are involved in a human enterprise of significant proportions, and it is important to get it right, okay? So I want to thank you very much. I want to thank you for the work that you do and the contribution that you make to the ministry and through the ministry to Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. It has been, we appreciate having the opportunity to clarify issues, and we have taken on board your final words that we know we have an important job to do and that it is extremely important that we do it properly and correctly. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.